Last month, this committee held a hearing about the dangers older Americans face due to unsafe foreign generic drugs. We exposed not only the threat posed by poor quality generic drugs that can hurt or even kill American seniors, but also how dependent the United States is on dangerous supply chains that threaten shortages, keeping life-saving drugs from getting to those who need them. The terrifying reality we face is that our nation is completely beholden to Communist China and India for the vast majority of our generic drugs and their ingredients. Communist China is the world's largest producer of active prescription drug ingredients, and India relies on Communist China for approximately 80% of the active drug ingredients it uses in drug manufacturing. A study from one of our witnesses, Mr. Tony Sardella, found that 83% of the top 100 generic drugs consumed by U.S. citizens have no U.S.-based source of active drug ingredients. Another 11% have only one domestic source of active drug ingredients. We also learned that in our last hearing that if Communist China or India shut off the flow of these essential drugs, the U.S. would only have months of prescription drug supply, forcing us to begin rationing drugs and turn away all but the most in need within a matter of weeks. Let me say that again. If Communist China, our adversary, or India decided to shut off supplying generic prescription drugs to the United States, we would run out of prescription drugs in a matter of months and be forced to begin rationing drugs and turning away all but the most desperately in need within a matter of weeks. I think everyone here remembers the supply shortages we faced during the COVID-19 pandemic of PPE supplies and even baby formula. Think about the catastrophic scenario we would face if millions of Americans didn't have the prescription drugs they need to survive. The health of older Americans is too important to leave to chance. Congress has to work with the Trump administration and act now to make sure that Americans have safe and high-quality drugs and to secure the prescription drug supply chain. 91% of prescriptions filled in the United States are for generic drugs. It is essential that the quality and safety of generic prescription drugs meets the same high standards of brand name drugs. A study showed that serious adverse events like hospitalization and even death were 54% more likely for foreign generic drugs compared to American-made generic drugs. I'm not exaggerating when I say that people are dying in America today because of bad medicine from under-regulated markets in India and Communist China. When I asked Peter Baker, a former FDA inspector, if he would allow himself or his family to take generic drugs made in India or Communist China, he said absolutely not. He told us that he believed that Americans were being killed every day from foreign-made generic drugs. I want to say that again. A former FDA inspector who worked in China and India told this committee that he believes Americans are being killed every day from dangerous foreign-made generic drugs. Mr. Baker also told a heartbreaking story of having to go to multiple pharmacies with his elderly grandmother to find a safe generic drug for her prescription, only to be forced to accept an Indian-made drug that had paid a massive settlement to the U.S. Department of Justice for falsifying quality testing. Peter knew that the drug in his grandmother's prescription was potentially dangerous, but had no other options. No American should ever have to deal with what Peter talked about and be worried that a family member will be hurt or killed by the medicine that is supposed to heal or treat them. It is unacceptable for that to be happening in our country, and every American needs to get loud and demand change. Everyone knows how I feel about Communist China, but I'm not the only one concerned about the dangers of foreign-made generic drugs. The BBC reported earlier this year that doctors in Communist China are worried about the quality of their generic drugs. One doctor said that antibiotics coming out almost entirely from Communist China were causing allergies and elevated blood pressure. Unsurprisingly, the Chinese Communist Party downplays these reports, just like they've denied using slave labor. But this is a real problem, and we cannot rely on low-quality, ineffective generic drugs from Communist China. In our last hearing, our witnesses underscored quality issues that present real dangers to the health of patients. In 2007 and 2008, heparin that sourced contaminated ingredients from Communist China killed up to 100 people in the United States. These problems continue to happen nearly 20 years later. In 2023, contaminated eye drops from India killed 4 people and caused adverse events in at least 55 patients. The federal government needs to ensure access to safe and high-quality drugs today. Following our hearing last month, Ranking Member Gillibrand and I sent a letter to the FDA asking what steps they are taking to stop dangerous drugs from coming into our country. I also met with FDA Commissioner Marta E, and he talked about his fight to fix the issues we have highlighted. I applaud his attention to this dire issue and the Trump administration's work to increase the amount of unannounced foreign inspections, a crucial first step to holding foreign manufacturers accountable to the same standards we hold American manufacturers. When it comes to solutions, I believe one of the most important things we can do is to establish a federal buyer's market. The federal government is the largest purchaser of drugs in the United States, accounting for 40% of outpatient prescription drugs purchased as of 2018. On the Senate Armed Services Committee, I pushed for the Department of War to leverage its buying power to prioritize purchasing drugs made in America using American ingredients. Senator Warren held a hearing last year on this same issue. If no American option is available, then the federal government should prioritize drugs and ingredients from allies and Trade Act compliant countries. The buying power of the federal government can move the needle and bring manufacturing for essential drugs back to the United States. The national security risk of relying on Communist China for essential drugs and drug ingredients are unacceptable. These same risks are unacceptable for seniors who trust they will have access to the drugs they need. In 2024, the U.S. manufactured 37% of its consumed drugs. This number is down from 2002 when it was 83%. So in just 20 years, we have ceded control of our medical supply chain to Communist China and India. Even if we start prioritizing certain drugs or types of drugs like antibiotics, which Communist China supplies 90% of the ingredients for globally, we would be making our medical supply chains much safer, not just for seniors, but for all Americans. I will continue fighting for the federal government to purchase American manufactured drugs. We cannot rely on Communist China for something as important as the health of Americans. Every American deserves to know where the drugs they're purchasing came from. That is why I support mapping our supply chains as well as our country of origin labeling. I've introduced the Country of Origin Labeling Online Act to require country of origin labeling for consumer products. Consumers deserve to know where items they purchase are made, and for something as important as the medications you take, that information is absolutely crucial. I will be introducing legislation on country of origin labeling for prescription drugs that would require drug labels include the country where each drug ingredient and the finished drugs are manufactured, processed, or compounded. We've already seen Communist China place export restrictions on rare earth elements as part of trade negotiation, and there's no reason why they won't do the same for medicines. Agencies like the Department of War and Veteran Affairs stepping in to purchase American-made drugs could bring industry back and create a steady supply of important medications and ingredients for the American people. Other steps like the Department of Commerce Section 232 investigation could level the playing field for American manufacturers. Section 232 tariffs are for goods that impact our national security, and I can't think of anything more crucial to the health of our seniors than generic drugs. On Friday, I sent a letter to Secretary Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Greer, encouraging them to immediately place Section 232 tariffs on generic drugs. This is a national security and a public health issue for seniors and all Americans. I look forward to this discussion with our witnesses on how we can make sure Americans never have to worry about missing a dose of their medication or the quality of drugs in their medicine cabinet. I'd like to turn it over to Ranking Member Gillibrand for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, for today's hearing. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here today. We really appreciate you. I'm looking forward to continuing our robust discussion on ways to improve and secure our domestic generic drug supply, which includes ensuring that pharmaceuticals entering the United States are of the highest quality and standard. During our previous hearing, we heard about some of the problems that consistently plague the generic drug industry and some proposals to begin to help to address the issues. Today, we will dig deeper into some bipartisan solutions that this committee and other committees of jurisdiction can work on together to ensure Americans can access high-quality drugs that they need when they need them. Currently, too many active pharmaceutical ingredients and key starting materials are made outside the United States. Given recent instability in geopolitics and international trade policy, this reliance increases the risk that Americans may not have access to the life-saving drugs in a time of crisis, threatening our national security. However, we must approach strengthening and reforming this extremely complex supply chain thoughtfully and thoroughly. Generic drug manufacturers cannot simply flip a switch and move all components of production to the U.S. or other allied nations. To ensure Americans have a reliable supply of safe and affordable drugs, Congress will need to work to make more targeted investments in biotechnology, research, infrastructure to create this long-term support and stability for the critical industry in our nation. We must examine the underlying economic dynamics in the current marketplace and adjust incentives to fix the, quote, race to the bottom in generic drug pricing, which can create drug quality issues, drive manufacturing outside of the U.S., or cause companies to stop production of certain drugs altogether. Additionally, we must strengthen the ability of federal agencies to ensure strict oversight of foreign manufacturing facilities to strengthen the supply chain and enable patients to access the quality medicines they need. As we look to address these issues, we must make sure drugs remain affordable for our constituents, particularly our seniors, many of whom are on fixed income. Americans are already struggling with high costs across the board, and I'm committed to working with Chairman Scott and my colleagues across the aisle to find solutions that serve our constituents by strengthening the generic supply chain, promoting quality domestic production, and protecting our national security. I look forward to this robust discussion as well as the future potential bipartisan legislation on the issue.
Thank you, Ranking Member Gillibrand. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses who are here to talk about their work to bring drug manufacturing of essential drugs back to the United States and making sure the American people have access to the drugs they need. First, I'd like to recognize Tony Sardella. Mr. Sardella is the founder and chair of the API Innovation Center, a nonprofit that establishes public-private partnerships to secure a drug supply chain. He is a distinguished fellow for health innovation at the Olin Business School at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you for your critical work you do and for being here today. Please begin your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee. As Chairman indicated, I'm the founder and chairperson of the API Innovation Center, dedicated to building health security of our generic drug supply chain. I'm honored to be here this afternoon and share how our work at the API Innovation Center is addressing the severe challenge of a vulnerable U.S. generic pharmaceutical supply chain. There's three key things that I want to share with you today. The first is the U.S. generic drug supply chain is over-reliant on foreign manufacturers and specifically placing our seniors and veterans at severe risk. Second, the API Innovation Center's private-public partnership model is showing promise in addressing this complex issue and the economic roots that drove the dependency. And third, policy instruments can foster increased U.S. private sector investment and production to address our vulnerabilities. Our over-reliance on foreign sources to meet our nation's needs are quite stark. As Chairman Scott mentioned, research we've done found 83% of the top 100 generic medicines prescribed to Americans have no U.S. source. I'd like to share some new research we just conducted on behalf of the committee. Our mapping of generic supply chain reveals that for 10 of the most frequently prescribed medications for our elderly and veterans, 95% of those medicines have no U.S. API source. And 84, even more stark, 84 have no finished drug product production, and they are dependent primarily on China. This continues with the research we provided before that mapped our generic supply chain from drug all the way to key starter materials and showed that for 40 critical medicines that we identified for our nation to have its own secure supply, that the key starter materials were exclusively 100% dependent on China for half of them, half of those critical medicines the nation requires. The API Innovation Center focuses on addressing this national security. It emphasizes modernizing existing idle domestic manufacturing that we uncovered through our research with manufacturers, and doing so to ensure our resiliency and stable supply chain. The model has three key components. First, investment of public funds that APIC has received from the state of Missouri, as well as from the Biomap ASPR federal program. That capital modernizes the production methods to produce these medicines. So we not just bring back production, but we're producing it in modern, advanced, more efficient manners. And also using new technologies, many of which have been developed here in the United States by equipment manufacturers. We take the investment in the new modern techniques and we contract existing idle FDA facilities that exist already to produce these modern methods of production. And third, we partner with in long-term agreements with end healthcare systems, national retail pharmacies, as well as drug production companies to be able to ensure a predictable demand and supply for the entire network. The approach is delivering promising results. Over 70 US-based manufacturers are collaborating and entering into agreements with APIC to build an end-to-end domestic supply chain capable of sourcing, developing, producing, and distributing cost-competitive US-made medicines with a near-term focus on 25 priority medicines that we've itemized and a long-term goal of 300 medicines made here in the United States. The partnership enables the US-based API and drug manufacturers to gain certainty of their demand and economic viability to produce in the US. It gives healthcare systems and national retail pharmacies certainty of supply and stability of cost. And our citizens and seniors gain a drug supply resiliency, and we as a nation gain national security. While innovative partnerships are essential, policy plays a decisive role. There's a critical need to clarify and harmonize the definition of made in America for pharmaceuticals. Current procurement rules allow drugs assembled in America but comprised of foreign APIs to be labeled as USA made. Second, the federal government's purchasing power can be leveraged. And lastly, sustained public-private investment to modernize idle facilities. The vulnerabilities are significant, but solutions visible. Thank you for the opportunity to share our research and perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Sardella. Now I'd like to introduce Tony Paquin, the co-founder, president, of CEO of iRemedy, a company from my home state of Florida working to provide buyers with American-made medical products. Mr. Paquin's company worked tirelessly to supply the federal government with medical supplies during COVID, and he brings a wealth of expertise into the medical supply chain. Mr. Paquin, thank you for being here today. Please begin your testimony.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. For over 25 years, I've worked in healthcare technology, logistics, and distribution. At iRemedy Healthcare, we manage an artificial intelligence procurement platform that supports manufacturers worldwide. My experience includes building software, scaling networks, partnering with hospitals, manufacturers, and government agencies, all of which has given me a clear view of how our supply chain actually functions on the ground. That vantage point has revealed two urgent truths. First, that far too much of our production of essential medicines has been ceded to China and India, leaving our nation dangerously exposed to weak oversight, counterfeit risks, and most importantly, price manipulation. And second, that an unintended consequence of that globalization is the concentration of our supply chain into a small group of intermediaries that restricts the flow of drugs into American hospitals, locking providers into contracts, and stifling supply chain and market innovation. Combined, these two truths are deadly. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and have seen firsthand the prosperity of an active manufacturing economy, as well as the devastation when industries are hollowed out. Today, I'm here to say bluntly, we must end our dependence on foreign adversaries and restore control of our medical supply chain to the United States. During Operation Warp Speed, my company was a key supplier of needles and syringes. We delivered more than 1 billion items for the country's needs. What I witnessed during that period was alarming. At one point, the Chinese Communist Party seized 40% of our China-based inventory awaiting shipment. We routinely dealt with bad actors attempting to bribe dock workers and factory managers peddling fake FDA 510K certifications. As you know, the vast majority of prescription medicines are generic, yet those drugs overwhelmingly come from high-risk overseas suppliers. When supply lines are disrupted, we quickly see shortages of life-sustaining medicines for conditions like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. Oversight is essential for immediate relief. We must enforce unannounced FDA inspections overseas, as we do here in the U.S. We must require clear country of origin labeling and independently validate imported shipments for quality. But these are Band-Aid fixes that do bring transparency and deter quality failures. But they won't fix the problem. The only real cure is to reshore the supply chain. And I'm here to report that we can do so. First, APIs. Nearly all come from overseas, especially China. We must invest in new technologies and fast-track permits for factories. We must treat this as the national security issue it is and prevent bureaucratic delays. Second, generic drug manufacturing. Here's the truth. The technology already exists in this country to make generics profitably without raising costs for consumers. What we lack is fair competition. Generics are often a commodity, and foreign governments have learned how to weaponize commodity pricing against us. Until we level that playing field, American manufacturers will never have a chance to compete. Let me give you a real-world example. Oxford Pharmaceutical is an Alabama-based generic drug manufacturer with the capability to produce life-giving medicines domestically. They are a high-quality, modern, U.S.-owned example of American manufacturing excellence. They make drugs here in America efficiently, safely, and at scale. What stands in their way is a market that has been deliberately tilted against domestic producers. Even when companies like Oxford can produce at competitive costs, they're forced to compete against artificially subsidized Chinese and Indian importers that are all too often unfairly awarded U.S. government contracts. Shockingly, this happened to Oxford just a few months ago. That system has to end. We must protect American producers with targeted licensing and trade enforcement. We must use artificial intelligence to overhaul the drug marketplace and reform federal procurement so that U.S.-made drugs are the default, not the exception. If given fair access, domestic manufacturers can compete and win. If not, we remain captive to adversaries abroad. President Trump has shown leadership with executive orders to prioritize American-made medicines, but we need an all-government response involving regulation, legislation, and procurement. We must act now. First, apply the immediate Band-Aid fixes, unannounced FDA inspections overseas, clear country of origin labeling, and randomized testing on imported drugs. These buy us transparency and time. Then cure the disease. Reshore API production with new technology. Manufacture generics domestically with fair trade protections free from foreign price manipulation. And use the full weight of government purchasing power to put resilience above cheap imports. Members of the committee, this is not just economics, this is sovereignty. This is national security. It is needed to protect our seniors, our soldiers, and our families when the next crisis strikes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership and to the committee for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Paquin. Next, I'd like to introduce Andrew Rechenberg, economist with the Coalition for a Prosperous America, a nonprofit organization that represents American manufacturers and producers across a number of industries, and sectors to support domestic industry and protect our national security. Mr. Rechenberg has experience with the Department of War as well as the Department of Commerce and is an expert in trade and industrial policy. Mr. Rechenberg, thank you for being here today. You may begin your testimony.
Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Andrew Rechenberg, and I'm an economist with the Coalition for a Prosperous America, leading analysis on pharmaceutical supply chains and domestic manufacturing. America's medicine supply chain is in a crisis. 2 decades of offshoring have caused domestic pharmaceutical production to fall from 84% of the US market in 2002 to just 37% today, leaving 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients with no US source whatsoever. India and China have captured the market by undercutting American producers, not through efficiency, but through state subsidies, poor labor standards, and safety shortcuts. This dependence has consequences. As US production collapsed, drug shortages tripled, from 88 in 2002 to more than 300 in 2024, driving 300 to 500% price hikes that erased any supposed cost savings. This is because 40% of our essential drugs rely on only a single manufacturer. When Intas Pharmaceuticals in India was shut down in 2023 for falsified data and safety failures, US hospitals had to ration chemotherapy because one factory made half of our cisplatin supply. These failures show what happens when we chase the cheapest offshore medicine instead of safe American production. That is not resilience. It is a national security breach at the heart of America's healthcare system. But it can be fixed. At CPA, we've developed a 5-pillar strategy to rebuild pharmaceutical independence. Pillar 1, the tariff rate quota system, restores control. The TRQ allows a limited volume of imports from trusted countries at 0 tariff rates. Imports above that quota volume, or from high-risk nations, face steep tariffs. Quota volumes are based on the gap between total US demand and current US production, then adjusted each year as capacity grows. Trusted in-quota countries would be limited to those with equivalent FDA-recognized safety standards. This TRQ system rebuilds capacity steadily without disrupting short-term supply. Strengthening domestic production directly is just as vital. Pillar 2, the PILLS Act, provides production and investment tax credits for US-made generics, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and biosimilars, plus a domestic content bonus for US sourcing. This creates the conditions for sustained growth in US pharmaceutical manufacturing. But rebuilding does take time, so Pillar 3, FDA reform, ensures the safety of current imports. 90% of foreign FDA inspections are pre-announced, and many plants go 5 years or more without review. When inspections do occur, they often reveal falsified tests and unsafe conditions, reflected in studies showing that generics made in India have a 54% higher rate of severe adverse events. Yet for imports, the FDA still relies on company paperwork instead of independent testing. We can address all of this by requiring independent batch testing for imported drugs in US labs, regular unannounced foreign FDA inspections, and strict penalties for offenders, including import bans. Next, Pillar 4, federal purchasing realignment, treats medicine procurement as a matter of national security. It ensures that federal programs prioritize reliable, US-made medicines. This aligns directly with the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Defense and Enhancement Act to strengthen domestic resilience and minimize reliance on risky and adversarial nations. Finally, we must look to the frontier of medicine. Pillar 5, biotechnology leadership. The US must invest heavily in NIH and biotech startup innovation and raise clinical trial standards that protect US patients and ensure drug quality. These steps will ensure the next generation of cures is discovered and made here at home. These 5 pillars are how we end shortages, ensure safety, and restore America's capacity to make the medicines our people depend on. America's medicine system is fragile by design, but it does not have to stay that way. Congress can act now to rebuild what was lost and ensure that never again will our patients, our hospitals, or our troops depend on foreign supply for life itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rechenberg. Now I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Gillibrand to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. I want to move to introduce our next witness, Dr. Marta Wosińska. Dr. Wosińska is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution Center on Health Policy with expertise in prescription drugs and pharmaceutical supply chains. Previously, Dr. Wosińska Previously served in the Federal Trade Commission, in the Office of Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. She's also served as economic advisor to the U.S. Senate Finance Committee. You may begin.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify at this important hearing. My name is Marta Wosińska, and I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Today, I speak in my personal capacity, reflecting nearly 15 years of studying drug supply chain issues from within the government and outside, and with no financial stake in the outcome. Over all these years, I have observed what policy solutions catch the interest of lawmakers. I have seen that many of the solutions that resonate sound good, but they don't address the problem that lawmakers claim they want to solve. So today, as we talk about solutions, I urge you to ask the following questions. What specific problem is the solution meant to address? What else is needed for the solution to succeed? How do we handle the unintended consequences? And is this the most effective and efficient, cost-effective and efficient path? Because only when you ask these questions, you will be best prepared to design policies that not only do the job well for patients, but also assure that taxpayer dollars are used wisely. For instance, if persistent drug shortages in hospitals are the top priority, durable solutions require shifting hospital incentives so that reliability, not just low cost, is valued. Transparency to hospitals around supply chain reliability will be important, and you will want to keep far away from tariffs unless you fix various payment systems. If the concern centers on China, then the focus should be on antibiotics, and for pretty much any other drug, the focus should shift upstream, away from pharmaceutical production steps and towards chemicals that are not regulated by FDA. And you will also want to think about how to leverage India in de-risking from China. If the objective is to increase domestic drug manufacturing, which, by the way, is a solution, not to supply concerns, not the problem, then any new facility counts as progress, regardless of whether it addresses areas of critical need or shortage risk. If domestic manufacturing is the goal, then you may not pay as much attention to whether policies designed to promote onshoring, like tariffs, could destabilize supply. And what if we're concerned that weak FDA oversight abroad creates opportunities for defective drugs making their way to
Good morning and welcome to day 9 of the Democrat shutdown. We give you a daily update here to just talk about what's happening and where we see things headed. Joined here by our leadership team and, of course, Chairman Mike Bost, who will talk with you about the pain that's being inflicted on veterans in particular. He runs that committee. I just want to summarize everything this morning as I've been doing on some interviews earlier today. This morning, Americans are watching a remarkable split screen. Two things happening simultaneously, and there's a rather stunning contrast between the two. On one screen, you see President Trump and Republicans delivering for the American people. You see President Trump and Republicans cutting taxes for hardworking American families. You see us ending the border crisis, ending the crime crisis. You see us eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse in government, and now resolving violent conflicts around the world. What President Trump achieved yesterday, was announced last night, is a truly historic foreign policy achievement. I mean, it cannot be understated. We should give a whole press conference just about that. The deal that he struck between Israel and Hamas will achieve incredible results, not just for that region, but for every peace-loving people around the world, everyone around the world. He's going to bring the hostages home. 2 years they've been in captivity. They'll finally be delivered home. We're all watching the images of the celebrations in Israel and around the world by people in Gaza and in Israel, that this is coming to an end. He's going to bring the hostages home. He's going to bring peace and security back to Israel and truly lay the foundation for a lasting peace in the Middle East This is a goal and an objective that's been stated by presidents and politicians and policymakers and people around the globe for generations. And President Trump has the strength and the vision and the resolve to do it. He's the only president who could have, as has been demonstrated. And look at the other side of the screen. So that's all going on one side of the split screen. Now look at the other. The stark contrast with the Democrats who've shut down the government. Republicans are busy working around the clock to deliver for the American people, voting over and over to open the U.S. government and laying the foundation for lasting peace and working to deliver for American troops and military families. And what do you see on the other screen? Democrats playing games with the lives and livelihoods of the people we represent. They have now voted in the Senate. The Senate Democrats have voted 6 times to keep the government shut down. And I just want to tell you one of the most outrageous things I've seen since I've been following politics in the mid-'80s when I was a kid in the Reagan era. Chuck Schumer did an interview last night and bragged, this is what he said, quote, he had the audacity to say, quote, every day of this shutdown gets better for us, his party. I don't even know how to comment on that. It's so stunning to me how callous he can be to play political games and use American citizens as the pawns in a political game. We're in day 9. The consequences of this Democrat shutdown are very real, and he can mock it and he can pretend like it gets better for him. It doesn't. It doesn't get better for the country. Right now, half our civilian federal employees are on furlough. Real, vital, critical services that American citizens in all categories rely upon are halted. And when we talk specifically about our military, right now, service members, military personnel at home and abroad, as well as Border Patrol agents, TSA, air traffic controllers, they're all working without pay. I was on C-SPAN this morning on that program they do in the morning where American citizens call in. They have a Republican line, a Democrat line, an independent line. One of the callers called in and she was so upset. She's a young military mother. She has 2 special needs children, as she told her story. In tears, she's so angry, and so am I, that their services are being delayed. I mentioned here at this podium last few days, I mean, I have a big military district in Louisiana's 4th District. We have Fort Polk in Barksdale Air Force Base, lots of airmen, lots of soldiers. Many are deployed right now, defending your freedom around the world. And they've left their young families at home. They live paycheck to paycheck, many of these service members. And this is not a game. Chuck Schumer thinks it is. He says, quote, every day of the shutdown gets better for us. What the heck is he talking about? All of us on this side, we're kept up at night. This is a sad situation, and we've got to get through it. We're almost 3 weeks ago, just by way of quick review, the House did its job. We did the responsible thing. We passed a clean, continuing resolution, no frills, nothing to it, 24 pages, bare minimum, to keep the lights on, so that Republicans and Democrats can do their work, and get together and do this job, to deliberate and negotiate and go through the process that Congress does on everything all the time, to work on all these issues. Voted to keep critical programs funded, and that ensures federal workers get paid, that our troops and TSA agents and Border Patrol and many more get their paychecks. We had that vote almost 3 weeks ago. Virtually every Republican voted to keep the government open and to make sure those paychecks are done. The Democrats in the House, all but one, voted to close the government and, by extension, stop paying troops, stop paying TSA agents, Border Patrol, air traffic controllers, and all the rest. We've done our job, and the Democrats need to do theirs now. That ball has been sent to the other court. That is the place where it lands right now. 6 times, I remind you, they voted to shut it down. We need 5 Democrats to break ranks. We need 5 of them to wake up and come to their senses and do the right thing for the American people. How long are they going to allow this pain to be sustained? I talked with the president last night. He called me after the peace deal was done, and he and I both lament, we all do, this terrible situation that we're in. While we're working to do all these positive things for the people and even settle conflicts around the world, the Democrats are playing games. It's political theater to them. They've reduced Americans' pain to a political prop. I'll just say this briefly. I'm going to let the other leaders speak here, but just a few things that you've seen. While we're doing all this work, we're working around the clock to deliver on all these things I've just listed. Democrats are playing games. They film themselves wandering the Capitol, beating on doors and posting flyers and pretending to look for their colleagues. They hosted a live stream. Oh, it's so embarrassing. The House Democrats hosted this live stream where they ate candy and told terrible jokes to each other. They had an audience smaller than this room for the whole country. The leader of the Democrat Party is bragging about the cost that this is being borne by the American people. And just yesterday, I had 2 Democrat senators come over and stage a failed publicity stunt outside my office. I heard about it, walked out and confronted them and set them right on the truth. They came to this side of the Capitol to try to put on a little political show for their online audience, and then they walked right back over there and voted for the 6th time to keep the government shut down. Give me a break. Democrats seem to be doing everything except the one thing that Americans desperately need and deserve, and that's passing our clean CR to get the government operating again. That's all we're asking of them. Stop the political stunts. Stop the madness. Stop saying that you're enjoying inflicting pain on the American people, for goodness sakes, and pass the clean CR in the shutdown today. I'm going to turn it over first to our chairman, Chairman Mike Bost. He, as you know, works on all things regarding American veterans. He's the chairman of our committee that handles all of that. And we just wanted him to talk specifically about the costs that are being borne by our veterans because the Democrats shut down. Chairman? Thank you.
First off, I want to say thank the Speaker, and let me tell you this. I believe Secretary Collins and the administration is trying to do everything they possibly can with the money that we actually provided for them in advance for our veterans. Thank heaven we did. So the healthcare side and appointments and everything through our VA from that side is not in jeopardy yet. But let me tell you the areas that are and the concerns we have. In the CR that we pushed over 3 weeks ago now, we actually had extenders for certain programs that are vitally important, like the Fox Grant, which provides mental health in contracted mental health for many of our veterans who the suicides continue to happen at 17 a day. We also have things that we pushed over as far as the concerns we're dealing with continuing education. Continuing education is starting to fall by the wayside. The concerns that we have with other programs like this, there's about 7 of those programs, but those are going to start falling by the wayside. Now, one of the concerns that we're already hearing is a GI Bill. Right now, we're hearing rumors that as many as half of the people that have a GI Bill, they're not receiving GI Bill payments to their universities. And therefore, when they get on the line to try to call to make sure that their education will continue and it'll be paid for, to try to straighten it out, there's no one there to answer the phones. That is a concern. Day to day, our veterans are trying to make ends meet. Day to day, they're trying to hold on to their benefits. And day to day, they keep hearing these concerns, and they're going to continue to get worse. As a veteran, and as someone who tries to provide for them, the fear that I have for them is as this goes on, it will only get worse. It's not a game. It affects real people's lives. Another program that's out there that is concerning is those that might be needing home health care. Those are private providers. Now, like I said, Secretary Collins is trying to shift things around, but the authorization language expired on the 1st of October. Folks, this is not a game. It's very, very serious. And let me tell you this as well. As I watch us coming up on the deadline on the 15th, that the first time that our not only our veterans in dealing with this, but our military personnel, our young enlisted that may have spouses and children that are making it payday to payday, are all of a sudden trying to figure out, I'm living payday to payday, but I'm going to get no pay due. Let me tell you, that's personal to me. That's who I was. When I joined the United States Marine Corps, I was 18 years old and turned 19 in boot camp, got married out of boot camp, had a child. In a short period of time, it was during the Carter administration, and we were living payday to payday. And when you saw no pay due, not everybody's got a parent that they can call. And you don't have a credit rating where you can actually call a banker. And you know what? Rent's still due. Food's still got to be put on the table. And for someone to say, hey, you know what? It's getting better for us every day. It's not getting better for them every day. And they are the people that are standing on the front line to keep this freedom of this nation in place. We are going to continue to do our job. We did our job. We sent it to the Senate. All of these things that I talked about were in that continuing resolution. And we made sure from our part at the VA committee that they were. It is time that the Democrats quit playing games with those people who they claim that they're all for, our veterans and those who serve this nation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it just shows you the real cost of a government shutdown that Chuck Schumer's imposed on the country. We hear over and over these stories, and we're hearing more of them every day now that we're in the 8th day of this shutdown. The pain that is being inflicted on real people. I did a town hall meeting last night. We had thousands of people on the call, and a number of people talked about the problems they're experiencing. Seniors that want to make sure their Social Security checks are going to be delivered. Obviously, families of military personnel, we know those stories. We hear those stories. And what does Chuck Schumer say? You know, I read you the quote yesterday of a senator just a few days ago who said, quote, "The point of this shutdown is not just suffering for suffering's sake, but to make a point." That was a different senator. And then yesterday, Chuck Schumer, of course, says, quote, "Every day this gets better for us." And so you've got to ask yourself, if you're Chuck Schumer, and a good day for you is defined by how much suffering you can impose on other people, including our men and women in uniform, maybe you need to look in the mirror and check yourself at the door and wonder what it is you're up here trying to accomplish. Is that really why Chuck Schumer ran for office? To inflict pain on other people so that he can have a good day, a better day for himself. When that is your measuring stick for a good day, is how much pain you're inflicting on other American families, you have lost your way. And yet they vote over and over again to keep the government shut down. While trying to talk about other issues, we can be talking about those other issues without inflicting pain on people. We can be debating our differences, as President Trump said he wants to do, by opening the government back up again. And by the way, once we get the government back open again, if Democrats ever come to their senses, we still have a lot of differences to resolve. Those differences don't just get resolved tomorrow. November 21st gets closer every single day too. And then they're going to try to hold the American people hostage again on that deadline for some other unrelated issue, so that they can inflict more pain on the American people. But don't worry, Chuck Schumer will be having a good day if that pain's going to be inflicted on others. Thank goodness we have a president in the Oval Office who continues to stay focused on the job he was elected to do by the American people. And Speaker Johnson just pointed out how critically important that job President Trump is doing. You know, as we mark the 2-year anniversary of the horrible Hamas attacks on Israel, President Trump is brokering a release of all the remaining hostages so that those families can finally get closure. Hopefully, some are still alive. We know, sadly, some are not. But those families want to have that resolved. They want to see their loved ones come home. And President Trump has worked tirelessly. He said he would work tirelessly. And he continues to deliver for the American people. He continues to lead on the world stage and stand up to the bullies around the world. He continues to fight for American families who are counting on him. And then you look at what he has to fight against. He's got to fight against governors who are going to court to block the president from keeping the citizens of those states safe. You're in Chicago, Illinois. You don't care about the party affiliation of a criminal. You just want to be safe in your community, and today you're not. And President Trump is trying to make you safe. You would think your governor for one day would put aside those petty differences and say, well, gee whiz, Mr. President, finally we agree on something. But no, the Democrat Party has made a decision. Every day they wake up and they just want to fight Donald Trump. It doesn't matter what it is he wants to do. He wants to keep communities safe. They're going to fight him on it. He wants to keep the government open. They're going to fight him on it. President Trump wants to make sure our troops are paid. Chuck Schumer wants to fight him on it and talk about how good of a day it is for Chuck Schumer. When that happens, Their party has lost their way, and it's not too late to come back. And so there will be other votes. Hopefully, we get 5 more Democrat senators that come to their senses and stop inflicting this pain on the American people. It's causing real harm on families. And hopefully, they stop worrying about what that measuring stick is that says they have a good day only when the American people are having a bad day. Stop inflicting pain on the American people, Chuck Schumer, and open the government up. End this madness. Our whip, Tom Emmer.
Yesterday, Senate Democrats, including the 2 senators from my home state of Minnesota, Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar, voted for a 6th time, as the Speaker mentioned, to shut the government down or keep it shut down. 6 times. That's 6 times that Senate Democrats have voted against, as Leader Scalise was just talking about, paying our troops. 6 times that they voted against the 13,000 Minnesota National Guardsmen who are showing up to work without receiving a paycheck. 6 times that they voted against supporting federal workers, air traffic controllers, border patrol agents, and the list goes on and on. And why? Because Democrats have decided they'd rather hold the American people hostage than pass the same nonpartisan clean CR that they supported just 6 months ago and that they passed 13 times under the Biden administration. Tina Smith claims she shut the government down so that she can, quote, protect Minnesotans' health care, unquote. But Tina, if that really was the case, why do you support a $1.5 trillion spending proposal that would give health care to illegal aliens while cutting $50 billion from rural health care? She's just not being honest. This was never about health care for the Democrats. This has been about picking a fight with President Trump so that they can try to score points with the terrorist wing of their party. It's pure politics. And nothing reveals their true motivations more than Chuck Schumer taking a victory lap, as both the Speaker and the leader have said, saying every day this gets better for us. So every day that our troops, TSA agents, and air traffic controllers work without pay is a better day than the last. That's disgusting. And every single person in this room should be holding Chuck Schumer accountable for his words. Unfortunately, Minnesota's 2 senators continue to follow Chuck Schumer off the end of the political pier with their needless shutdown. Earlier this week, our entire Minnesota Republican congressional delegation sent a letter to Senators Smith and Klobuchar urging that they please do the right and responsible thing by passing the House's nonpartisan clean CR and end the massive amount of pain that they're inflicting on Minnesotans and the American people. Our message today is still the same, and it's not going to change. All of us are united. It is enough with the games. Pass our CR, get the government up and running again for Minnesotans. And I say this to my 2 senators, the people that elected you to do your job. Do your job. Your constituents deserve better than this. And with that, I turn it over to our conference chair.
Thank you. It's interesting. I often want to ask Chuck Schumer, who is us? Because it's definitely not the American people, right? And as the leader said, compare and contrast, the speaker said, compare and contrast the 2 split screens. So I want to start today, and I want to tell you just how grateful that I am that the hostages are finally coming home and that peace in the Middle East is on the horizon. And I want to look right to you and say, thank you, President Trump, because without you as our leader, this would not have happened. It is Joe Biden, or it was Joe Biden's weakness that got us into this situation. And thank God for you, President Trump, that it is your strength that has gotten us out of this situation. And this didn't happen by accident, right? It happened because of our president's strong leadership that puts America first and peace first. So again, I applaud President Trump for securing this historic peace deal. Now, like our speaker said, let's shift gears. The impact of the government shutdown is growing by the day. Planes are being grounded, paychecks are being missed, and people are hurting. Different than Chuck Schumer, he's having a good day. The American people are hurting. And why? I'll tell you why. Because Democrats are terrified of their own radical base. They are scared to death of their radical base. And let's be honest, Schumer is scared out of his mind from AOC. Think about that. Why else would he do it? He's voted for this 13 other times before. But let me share with you, enough is enough. Democrats have voted 6 times to keep the government closed. 6 times Democrats have voted against the American people. 6 times Democrats have voted against the American people. And if they do it again, 1.3 million brave men and women in their uniform could miss their paychecks next week. Chuck Schumer, how is that a good day for them? Explain that to them. I realize it's good for you and your radical base, but explain to those service members how that's a good day for them. That's 1.3 million families wondering how they are going to pay the bills, how they're going to buy groceries, how they'll fill the gas tank. That is disgraceful. Shame on you, Chuck Schumer. Our troops aren't bargaining chips. They are heroes. And let's treat them like they deserve to be treated. So when the Democrats vote again, I ask that they think of the military families who rely on the October 15th paycheck as their only source of income. And explain to them, Chuck Schumer, how that's a good day for them. I ask that they think of the servicemen and women living paycheck to paycheck. I ask that they think of them, not of the radical base that they're trying to appease. Let's put our troops before politics. Pass the clean House bill. Open up the government and pay our troops. Thank you. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
I understand this is a heavy situation, this shutdown. Both parties think we have the right goal and we're trying to strategize their way there. But why not put politics aside and shutdown strategizing aside to pass a standalone bill to pay the military? You mentioned that military mom that was on C-SPAN this morning. Do you ever think that this is lives and not politics, and the shutdown posture can be put aside?
I'm so glad you asked the question. We're not pursuing a political strategy. The CR is clean. It doesn't have any Republican priorities on it at all. In fact, we're extending Biden-era policies and spending. It's exactly what Chuck Schumer gave you impassioned speeches on as recently as March of this year that must be done, that you don't play games with people's lives. They're the ones playing politics, not us. I've explained this, and I'll say it again. If there was something that we could peel off of the CR, if I could take a Republican priority or policy or trick or gimmick off the CR and make it more palatable for the Democrats in the Senate to vote for, I would have already done so. But I didn't send any of that on. We sent a totally clean document over there because we're operating in good faith. What's our goal, our strategy? To keep the lights on for the people of this country so that we can have their Congress working to resolve all these issues. They're trying to make this about healthcare. It's not. It's about keeping Congress operating so we can get to healthcare. We always were going to. They're lying to you, okay? The healthcare issues were always going to be something discussed and deliberated and contemplated and debated in October and November. It always was. Everybody in the building knows that. It's going on right now. There are conversations that have been going on for months leading up to this. They're lying to you. They're playing political games. They're trying to pretend that a December 31 policy issue has something to do with the fiscal cliff that we faced on September 30th with a shutdown. And they're doing that out of desperation. Why? Because their policies are so unpopular. The Democrat Party is in free fall. They have no leader. They have no policy that they can present to the people. Their platform was reputed in the last election. President Trump won every swing state in the popular vote. The House Republicans had the highest popular vote in the history of that's ever been recorded. Why? Because the American people rejected the woke progressive nonsense that they're all still clung to. So they don't have anything. I mentioned yesterday, they just had a poll. The Democrat Party has the lowest approval rating of any time since polling began. So what do? They're desperate. There's a rising Marxist wing in the Democrat Party. They're about to elect a mayor of New York City. Chuck Schumer's from New York. He sees a rising Marxist challenge to himself. And there's one thing that Chuck Schumer cares about more than anything else, and that is his Senate seat. The guy's been in Congress for 44 years. He doesn't know how to live life outside this building, and so he will do anything to make sure that he keeps that seat. He thinks AOC is going to challenge him or some other Marxist. I'm just telling you the plain truth, and I take no pleasure in this. I'm trying to muster every ounce of Christian charity that I can, but this is outrageous. He's playing games with the American people. Real people are being hurt, veterans and troops and everybody, people that rely on these services. God bless America. Do the right thing and open the government. Yes, yeah.
If the goal is to keep the lights on and to protect these veterans and certain those who are being hurt, why not put a standalone military pay bill on the table?
We have already voted to pay the troops. We did it 3 weeks ago. We put that bill on the floor, and the Republicans voted to pay the troops, TSA agents, Border Patrol, Air Traffic Control, and everybody else. The Democrats voted no. Go pull the record. It was 3 weeks ago. We had the vote. Only one Democrat voted with us to pay the troops. We've done it. The House has done its job. The reason the House isn't here in regular session is because they turned the lights off. We passed the bill, pay the troops, pay all these essential workers, provide services to the American people. We sent it over there clean. It's 24 pages. It's a bare bones document. It has no Republican priorities on it at all. It's exactly what they voted for before. And they decided to turn this into a political stunt. So coming back here and doing it and having a duplicative vote to do the same thing we already did would accomplish nothing, because Chuck Schumer's going to stop it in the Senate. They're playing games. He's enjoying it. He told you in his own words, every day of the shutdown gets better for us. Golly, it's despicable to me. Yes, Chet.
Yesterday, you and I engaged Senators Gallagher and Kelly. Called this photo op.
Publicity stunt. Yeah.
We called this a publicity stunt. Yesterday, Mr. Lawler went down and confronted Mr. Jeffries afterwards. I guess my question was, you as the Speaker, considering how tensions are rising in the building, if you had the House here, everybody here, there would be fights in the halls. Are you concerned, and is it incumbent upon you as the Speaker to try to lower this temperature? When we see what happened outside your office yesterday, you engaged with the senators, Mr. Lawler coming downstairs, engaging with Mr. Jeffries, who, you really gave it back to them. But I've not seen that type of confrontation in this building in my 30 years.
I haven't either, Chad, and it concerns me. I know you have. I know you have. Look, since I got here, January 2017, I've been working on restoring civility to the institution. The first thing I ever did in Congress was draft the commitment to civility. I was proud that 52 out of 53 members of my freshman class, as I remember, signed on to that. Republicans and Democrats, treat one another with dignity and respect. Let's have policy disputes, but not make it personal. This gets personal. Emotions are high. People are upset. I'm upset. I'm a very patient man, but I am very angry right now because this is dangerous stuff. And so is it better for them probably to be physically separated right now? Yeah, it probably is, frankly. I wish that weren't the case, but we do have to turn the volume down. The best way to turn the volume down is to turn the lights back on and get the government open for the people. Do the right thing. We need 5 Senate Democrats. Remember, it's math. We have to have 60 votes in the Senate to do this. Every Republican in the building is voting to open the government. The president wants to open the government. We need a few more Democrats because we only have 53 Republicans in the Senate. We got to have a handful of Democrats to join and do the right thing, and I hope they will. We'll keep you posted, wait for developments, and let's pray this ends soon. Thank you.
Is the House in session next week?
Okay, so that lasted about 30.
To American patients. Onshoring could help because we will be building newer, more automated facilities, and FDA would have an easier access to these facilities. But let's be realistic. Onshoring will require government support to undo the economic forces that moved production offshore. In fact, a lot of government support. With constrained budgets, this means policymakers should prioritize. So I would urge you to consider that essential medicines and chokeholds with China are much more pressing onshoring targets than Indian-made statins or blood pressure medications. Fortunately, we do have other options for addressing product defect risks in commonly used medications. FDA can create greater quality assurance by increasing unannounced inspections, and Congress can support FDA by providing more resources. But we would need to do more because many industry observers and compliance professionals tell me that the current inspection-based model for oversight is not enough. This is where I urge the committee to consider the proposal I published this morning, which would require every importer to designate a qualified person based in the US with personal responsibility for verifying that each batch meets quality standards. Mandatory product testing would be part of that process. This system is already working for drugs in Europe and has precedent in US drug regulations and other US sectors like finance, where CFOs must personally certify financial disclosures. To conclude, let me reiterate that lasting policy must focus on clearly defining the problem, aligning incentives so the right behaviors follow, and adapting proven practical solutions from other settings facing similar challenges. When reforms are grounded in clear objectives and matched to the challenge, they will best protect patients and ensure prudent use of public resources. Thank you again for inviting me to participate. I look forward to your questions and to this committee's leadership in advancing meaningful reforms that will enhance both the quality and reliability of America's drug supply.
Thank you, Dr. Wosińska. Now we'll turn over to questions. We'll start with Coach Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks for the panel being here today. I'm going to ask the obvious question, Mr. Rechenberg. Do we have, if we closed our borders, do we have the ability and the assets and the chemicals that we could mine to make every drug that we need in this country?
No, not currently. And that's why in the TRQ plan that I'm proposing, we do work with trusted countries with regulatory standards equivalent to our own. And the FDA already recognizes this through mutual recognition agreements with the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland as well. And so we do have enough capacity when working with trusted equivalent regulatory nations like that. But currently on our own, no, we do not. And that's why we need to rebuild this capacity.
Would we have to use China at all?
No, we would not.
Okay, good. Mr. Paquin, you talk about how companies like Oxford Pharmaceuticals should be used as an example of how it is possible to onshore drug manufacturing in a competitive environment.
That's correct, Senator. They are a very well-run, significantly sized, highly automated production facility in Birmingham, Alabama. And they really can produce pretty competitively. And I think sometimes we sort of misunderstand a little bit of the cost factor of these drugs. Amlodipine, for example, costs about 2 cents a dose to manufacture, but is reimbursed by Medicare Part D at 10 cents. So actually, the manufacturing cost is a very small part of the total cost that ends up going to the consumer or to the payer. And the manufacturers like Oxford Pharmaceutical here in the United States can operate pretty competitively if they're not a target of unfair competitive practices coming out of India.
So what changes do you think we need to make to have Oxford and other companies to be on a level playing field? What do we need to do?
Well, I think there's really two, many things we can do, but there's two immediate actions that we could be looking at. I think Andrew and the Coalition for Prosperous America made a good recommendation about, quotas based on the marketplace and not allowing a country like India to overwhelm our supply, thereby driving down the value of those drugs. And secondly is the VA and the US government should really prioritize domestic manufacturing over foreign manufacturing. And that is something that can be done without any major additional cost to the government and is not happening currently.
You mentioned in your testimony that Oxford has modern FDA-approved facilities, but still loses contracts to virtual importers tied to China and India. Can you explain what that says about the way our current system works?
Yeah, well, first off, I would say it doesn't work very well in terms of recognizing the national security implications and just the good sense of supporting a domestic manufacturer. Those contracts that they recently lost were probably a lowest price technically acceptable type of contract. And I think what's happening there is the VA is really not applying the right way to think of technically acceptable. All generic drugs, I would argue, are not equivalent. A generic drug manufactured in Birmingham, Alabama, is probably going to be much higher quality and reliable than a drug made somewhere in India where we don't have good access to surveillance of that manufacturer. So I think that, and then also when we look at technically acceptable, we should consider resilience issues. Investing in our domestic manufacturing capability should be one of the considerations when somebody like the VA is putting a contract out for bid.
Thank you, Mr. Rechenberg. As we saw during COVID, the United States is way too reliant on China. We mentioned that, and India. How can a well-designed tariff rate quota system be used to strengthen domestic production and mitigate shocks or supply shortages in the U.S. market?
Yes, absolutely. And the main cause of the supply shortages in the market right now is disruptions to these very few sole manufacturers in China and India. We're very much reliant on the single source vulnerabilities. But if we give the market space for U.S. producers through a tariff rate quota system, it very much encourages companies to reinvest in the U.S. and bring production because there's this guaranteed market space that domestic producers can capture. And so over time, it will bring back and diversify our supply base, which will lead to less shortages over time as we have more backup options and more U.S. domestic supply.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Gillibrand.
Senator Kim?
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Wosińska, I wanted to just start with you. I was intrigued by what you raised in terms of that idea about the EU qualified persons. And I guess I just wanted to start by just asking, does a framework like that model already exist in other sectors in the United States? I felt like you said something about on the finance side and others, but I just wanted to get a little bit more clarity from you, just how novel of an idea this is.
Absolutely. It's actually not a novel idea. I mean, for one, it has been used in Europe for decades. But in the United States, in terms of FDA and something that FDA is already familiar with during when FSMA passed, so the Food Security Act, Modernization Act, there are a couple of programs, one for drug importers, and I discuss it more in the paper that I published earlier today, where the importer is an extra layer of verification that the product that is being imported into the United States, they have to do a certain set of checks and, in a sense, verify. And there's a person who is responsible for verifying and signing off that everything meets the standards that are expected. So we have that. We have it in the Sarbanes-Oxley bill. It's the same general concept that somebody takes on personal responsibility for what is being put forward. And it also exists in a number of other professions where there is actually this kind of accountability that's added.
Given your knowledge about our markets and our structures here in terms of this industry, how challenging would it be to be able to implement this? How significant of a change would this create?
So you would have to modify legislation, right? You would have to, the Health Committee would need to make changes to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. That would be necessary. In terms of how big of a shift it would be, it would depend how it would be designed. I don't think we have enough time to kind of go into the details about what are the levers. But for example, the qualified person framework in Europe applies to every manufacturer, including domestic European manufacturers. Here, the idea is to, in a sense, complement what FDA is already doing and sort of complement in areas where they are struggling much more, which is with countries that don't have comparable regulatory systems. And so you could narrow it down in that particular way. There's a question: do you do it? So there's mandatory testing that Europe does, and you actually the product actually have to make it into Europe first before it gets tested. So it sits there in warehouses. Would that be necessary? It adds to cost, but then it also adds a certain level of assurance. So one thing is one thing that I would like to mention is there are different ways of trying to solve this and level the playing field. If you were to ask me, I would prefer to level the playing field in a way where we actually have this kind of quality assurance, because overnight we're not going to be able to switch away from our reliance, especially on India. India in 2024 produced 61% of solid oral dose products that we sell in the United States. And the full market is 187 billion pills, and India makes 61% of them. We're talking about 180 different facilities. We're talking about API facilities of probably over 200, well over 200. The size of this is massive, and I think we need to prioritize. Yeah. And one way for us to deal with the onshoring is to figure out some other ways to help that.
Well, I think the idea is that we can have multiple tools that don't have to run
right.
sequentially,
That's
but
right.
simultaneously. Mr. Rechenberg, you raised the issue about independent batch testing and things that are somewhat similar to what we just heard. I don't know how familiar you are with this qualified persons model, but what's your sort of initial reaction to that, and what else can we be thinking about in terms of independent batch testing?
Yeah, I think that this is also a critical point for anything that we're currently importing needs to be verified for quality, because a lot of the time in the US currently, we're getting drugs that are imported and we only find out after the fact that they have these bad tests and then they're recalled and US patients have already taken them. If we adopt a more European style model where we have this independent batch testing, that in order to have these drugs released into the US market, they have to be tested and verified that they are quality drugs, that they work for what they say they're going to work for, then this will greatly reduce the risk. And so this is an essential first step.
You think it's worth exploring these different ideas that are out there?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And with that, I'll yield back.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having supplied the medical device industry for close to 30 years, this is just quality control 101 we're talking about here. It's actually shocking it's not in place. Chairman knows I'm big into data. So I want to understand the raw material supply chain here. We talk about precursor chemicals. Approximately how many precursor chemicals do you need? What's the universe of that? I'll ask you, Mr. Paquin, or whoever knows it.
I could say within one dimension. So we looked at 40 critical medicines. They were based on 7 foundational chemistries. So 7 to make the 40. Started with raw chemistry, 7 raw chemicals. They got converted into key starter materials. Those got converted to active pharmaceutical ingredients and then drug. Okay. So the ratio is not of magnitudes of order that's insurmountable. It's achievable.
How many total drugs do we have? Anybody have a number?
3,200 approved drugs for use in the United States.
And so over 3,000.
Correct.
How many active pharmaceutical ingredients comprise those 3,000 drugs?
We don't have specific data on it, but I would say in the hundreds, not thousands by any means.
For API, it would be the same number, right? Because a drug is the API. So
Correct.
it would be the same number. But the question is how many intermediates or reagents or solvents or key starting materials that will be less.
Again, I'm just so are there 100 precursor chemicals, or is that overstating the case?
Probably a little higher than 100 as raw chemicals,
but
within magnitude of order. Yeah.
And almost all of those are produced in China?
Dominant number of those are produced in China. Our chemical manufacturing base moved to China many decades ago, and they control that.
So if you're getting a brand name drug, are those precursor chemicals for the brand name drugs produced here in America?
No, they would be likely also produced elsewhere, keeping in mind that most of our new branded drugs are biologicals, and we're talking about drugs that are called small molecules. They're chemically derived.
So we are highly deficient in the base raw
Correct.
material, the precursor chemicals. Most of that's in China. Even with brand name drugs, that's a precursor chemical coming in from China. Is that easier to quality control than the active pharmaceutical ingredients?
The key starter materials from a control standpoint still have issues in regards to their quality, if you want to say like impurities, still exist in those key chemicals.
But because we're taking those precursor chemicals, now for brand drug, are they also getting the API then primarily?
That is correct.
And then they're just stamping the pill? Ms. Wosińska, you're shaking your head.
So API is largely, for branded drugs, is largely made in the United States and Europe.
Say that over again.
So for branded drugs, API is overwhelmingly made in the States and Europe,
But
not China.
But using precursor chemicals primarily from China.
Only if they are small molecules. So back to the point that Tony made, if you have biologics, the ones, and a lot of the branded drugs are biologics, those are made with an entirely different process that's not chemical. You actually grow them in cells.
Okay. And that's done here in the U.S.?
That would be done in the U.S. and Europe.
Okay, so the precursor chemicals, that's a refining process, requires permitting. Why was that offshored? Because of permitting process, or is there any kind of, I wouldn't think in big, large refining processes, you can have much cost advantage to do it offshore. It's just, is it primarily problem permitting?
No, the genesis of that offshoring had multitude of factors. One was regulatory oversight in the United States for those facilities versus foreign, the cost of labor in foreign countries versus the United States.
I mean, refining, you got a lot of equipment, and there's
Correct.
not many people hanging around a refinery plant.
Well, and the third part was this a desire not to have those facilities here or near populations in the United States.
Because it's a dirty manufacturing process.
Just large emissions, large facilities.
So we're going to first have to overcome that. So there are basic and precursor chemicals, and we have to have that honest discussion. By the way, Ms. Wosińska, we are singing on the same hymnal here.
Mm-hmm.
Solve a problem, you have to first properly define it. And that's why, I've only got 5 minutes. I'm basically out of time here. We need to properly define this problem. We need to understand the raw material supply chain. We need to understand volumes. We need to understand what we're talking about. And so before we leap to a solution that's mistargeted, but let's get all this data down. So again, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate this hearing. This is extremely important. We need to fully understand this. We need more data.
And if I could add to it, one of the things I'd mentioned was the fact that we're not just reshoring, we're using advanced technology. So the ability to convert those large facilities into equipment that fits on this table is a critical added value. So bringing it to the United States with advanced technologies, advanced equipment that allow us to make those facilities smaller, cleaner, and more efficient.
But final point. Doing a QC check on even imported drugs, this is not rocket science. Okay, now people can cheat on it. It needs regulatory oversight, but this should not be hard, and it's shocking that it's not already in place. I'm sorry, it shows the failure of our federal health agencies, truthfully. It's the utter failure that this is happening today.
Well, the fact we don't have a supply chain, we don't have a map. Right? There was never even thought about having a map. We've allowed ourselves to be so dependent. It doesn't make any sense.
And we've known about these drug shortages for a long time, and we've done nothing about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I welcome this committee's eager efforts on this issue, because I think we can make a difference on a bipartisan basis on this. Dr. Wosińska, let's talk a little bit more about China specifically. You mentioned about your concerns about antibiotics, and that should be prioritized. Tell us what else you think should be prioritized. What specific medicines do you believe we're most vulnerable to for dependency? Lay the risk out for us.
So thank you for this question. So I think every one of us here at this table would agree that antibiotics are by far the most vulnerable. If you actually look at India and what Indian government is concerned about, they are also themselves very nervous about their own reliance on China, especially around antibiotics. And so a lot of the subsidies that they are doing is to actually de-risk their own supply chains, actually on our behalf to a large extent. So this is great because they're making these investments without the American consumers having to pay for it, taxpayers to pay for this. But there's this concern about antibiotics. That's by far the most concerning. I think it's much more difficult back to the mapping exactly which drugs have the largest exposure to China other than that. So I would say that this is, in a sense, we don't have to wait to figure out that antibiotics and we need to move on. On other things, we do need to do more homework and understand it. I will say that in terms of mapping, I am a little wary about mapping it for everything. I would much rather start with here are the essential medicines. And here, let's figure out where they come from, because those are the ones that we know we will be able to secure. So I would probably start prioritizing drugs first in terms of their importance, and then really in detail mapping, because it's not just figuring out where the KSM comes from. The key starting material is only one of the chemicals that you use. You need reagents and you need solvents, and those are largely made in China. So you have to know all the pieces. And if you try to do this for 3,000 drugs, we're going to be stuck in analysis paralysis for a really long time. So I would say, yes, absolutely mapping, but let's prioritize where we map first.
Does anyone want to add to that answer from their perspective?
I do. On the mapping, one of the things we've found is we have worked to map several hundred, is that there's purposeful obfuscation of where the supply comes from. And so on
By whom?
By companies in China who in other areas where
They pretend they're from the United States.
Correct. There are many different versions of a company, so you can't quite track back to, is it produced in a China facility? Could be a multitude of reasons. It could be that maybe the facility has some sort of FDA warning. It could be just based on business and ownership structure that they don't want it to be known who owns which company, but it's very difficult. We've found that, although we're working through it, there are data sets that allow you to identify where those sources are coming from beginning to end.
Tony or Andrew, do you have anything you want to add to the China problem?
Yeah, I would just add that I think it underscores our inability ultimately to have oversight into China and to really understand what the problem and the sourcing is. I agree that we should focus on essential medicines. That's a definable problem. We can zero in on that. But I think the strategy is to then move that into domestic manufacturing as quick as possible. Then we have control of the supply chain.
If I could add to that, we've also taken a lens on not only essentials, because some of these are very, very low cost medicines, but also what do the healthcare systems need? What do national retailers need? What does the government need? And what makes economic sense to produce here in the United States with advanced technology? When we put those lists together, we did come together with a prioritized list where it makes economic sense. There's demand for those medicines. There's a need for them, and they can be a sustainable investment.
Have you submitted that list to us?
We've submitted it in collaboration with ASPR, and be happy to submit those as well.
Submit it to the committee.
Be happy to.
And Andrew?
Yep. Yeah, and the final part that I would add is that this does have to be a drug-by-drug approach, especially for a program like the TRQ. And I agree that the antibiotics are one of the most critical and one of the most urgent to start on. And these are going to have different solutions because they have different supply chains. But additionally, I would say that India is not necessarily a de-risking from China. India has plenty of its own problems, whether it's safety issues, FDA flags that have been in India facilities. And as on top of that, India had the same problems during COVID. They cut off some of their supply to the United States, not because of any adversarial geopolitical reasons, but they have their own population they're trying to supply. So the more we can bring back to the US, the safer our supply chain will be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today, especially a great Floridian. Always appreciate seeing a fellow Floridian. I think during the COVID years, a lot of things came to light that maybe Americans weren't paying attention to, even those in the industry, and dependence for our drug supply chains on these foreign nations, I think really started hitting home for a lot of people. But I don't think most Americans know that more than 50% of the manufacturers supplying our market, it's coming from overseas. I don't think they know that. I don't think that they know that one of you mentioned that 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients are manufactured overseas, or that China and India combined make up 85% of active API filings. I don't think Americans understand that. So just for having this hearing, I think Chairman Scott does the Americans a service in shining a light on this, specifically when you look at the fact that drug and API manufacturers in China and India receive the most FDA warning letters for violations, which can mean carcinogens and medicines, destroying or falsifying data, and non-sterile manufacturing. Everybody's shaking your head. Correct. How long has this been prevalent that we've been seeing these types of violations? Has the increased as our dependence on these foreign nations has increased?
I think this is a unintended consequence of the globalization activity over the last 20 years, Senator. And I think you make a very good point. COVID really created the awareness because it broke the global supply chain, and then we all experienced what you're referring to. And I think that the average person in America is not really aware of this problem. I do believe that we are a growing awareness that we didn't have maybe 5 or 10 years ago. When we talk about the various actions to take place, and obviously I keep going back to the idea of bringing supply back to domesticating here in the United States, but the idea of country of origin labeling on a medication would probably do a lot towards what you're describing, and that is making the average consumer, and by that I mean not just patients, but also the doctors and pharmacists and healthcare professionals, aware of this risk. And that'll probably serve us well as we try and correct the problem.
I want to add, when we commenced the initiative and formed the API Innovation Center, it's only been 3 years in existence. The first study we did was a perception gap study. And that study looked at the perception of our reliance or of shortages versus real data around the shortages. What was striking at that time was the two most important stakeholders in our country underestimated the risk: scientists and government. And I really commend these hearings to expose that, both from a government and a scientific community. And by nation, we greatly underestimated the risk of shortages and over-reliance compared to other nations like China, India, and Europe. So that perception gap is starting to close thanks to these type of sessions and the interest, and we're working effortlessly to continue with our publications to close those gaps.
I have to imagine that if consumers had the information and the choice, knowing where about the increase in violations, I mean, at this point, are consumers ever informed that where the main ingredients in the drugs that they are taking are manufactured?
Very unlikely. There's no transparency. This is a very interesting concept. This is an industry like any other supply chain. Any other supply chain, you can look and understand where the product comes from, what the ingredients are, and where it's sourced. Not our pharmaceuticals. Any other product that you procure has clarity where you can compare quality of that product. You cannot compare the quality of the pharmaceuticals. As a result, 1 in every 4 prescription in the United States is from a facility that has an FDA violation. A quarter of the prescriptions have a violation. Now, I don't want to create alarm. Some of them are simple procedural violations, but nonetheless, it means a quarter are being prescribed that don't have some sort of violation on the FDA. It is not known. And what's also striking is while we overestimate the cost, when we work with manufacturers, we're talking like less than a penny to have a U.S. existing manufacturer manufacture that medicine here in the United States with the highest quality manufacturing standards.
And I'm out of time, but I hope you will explore, Mr. Chairman, you do your questioning, the national security implications for a failure in the supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today. So we're talking about a broken supply chain, and I was looking at the numbers on this. So the U.S. imports 7 times the amount of drugs that we were importing in the year 2000. That's how much this has gone up. And you all are discussing how our reliance on foreign-made pharmaceuticals exposes Americans to drug shortages to safety risks and exposes seniors more than anyone. So for years, I've been working with my colleagues to try to advance reforms, establishing stronger transparency rules, closing loopholes in the Buy American requirements. And I just want to say we've gotten a lot of pushback from people who make a lot of money by keeping all of this opaque and maximizing their profits and minimizing safety for the American people. So today I want to hit on something that you all have mentioned, and that is how we get more drugs manufactured domestically, how we move our supply chain here to the United States. So, Mr. Rechenberg, you're an expert on drug supply chains. You know that other countries are subsidizing the manufacture of prescription drugs. How does that affect our ability to make these drugs here in the United States?
Yes, and this is one of the main problems, that these foreign companies are being subsidized by their own governments, and so they're able to severely underprice U.S. producers and drive them out of the market. And so we really need a comprehensive approach here, starting with something like a tariff rate quota system to create a space in the market for U.S. producers. And we need to supplement that with direct production incentives for companies, whether through an act like the Pills Act or through federal procurement. Federal procurement can be a huge part of this, and incentivizing and prioritizing American-made medicine.
So let's talk a little bit about buying here in the United States. The federal government could make it easier and less risky for manufacturers to make their products in the U.S. if we would just leverage the power of our federal contracts. That means the government makes a deal with the manufacturer and says, we guarantee we will buy a certain volume of drugs over the next several years. And that makes it better for you. Make the investments, you get out there, you produce the drugs. Now, the DoD actually has contracts for essential medicines because, for obvious reasons, it is important to make sure that our service members have the drugs they need as a national security issue. And I have been pushing DoD to make those contracts domestic production advances. So, Mr. Sardella, you lead the API Innovation Center, and you've actually looked in to how many critical drugs rely on ingredients manufactured exclusively in China. I think you were talking about this earlier. Would it help national security to expand federal contracting programs at DoD and other agencies and focus them on domestic drug manufacturing?
Absolutely. It would be a significant lever to bring back a strong U.S. industrial base for manufacturing. Commend all the incredible work you've done in this area. And then secondly, one of the elements that would be also very effective is shifting the contracting vehicle from what is an IDIQ, indefinite demand, indefinite quantity. In business, an indefinite demand and indefinite quantity does not reduce the risk. There's no certainty. You could lose a contract or volume. Turning that into a certainty of demand and volume and even cost or price so that a manufacturer can make an investment. We have a small business in Missouri where we've placed 2 medicines for manufacturing for a healthcare system. We've provided them our technology that we developed. They are now making investments to expand their facility because they have certainty that the healthcare system is giving them a long-term agreement. If the U.S. government did the same, we expect the same.
So you and I are in the same place on this, that more robust federal contracting can create the kind of sustained demand that manufacturers need so that we can eliminate these supply chain vulnerabilities and protect our national security. And for me, that is reason enough to implement them. But some critics have warned that, if you shift to American-made drugs, it will be too expensive. On the other hand, we're paying a price, A, for vulnerability, and B, if our seniors end up taking drugs that are ineffective. And so they are sicker, they stay sick, lower quality drugs, or if our hospitals are getting price gouged during shortages. So, Mr. Rechenberg, do you think that shifting to more domestic manufacturing of pharmaceuticals would, over the long run, cost more money or save more money?
It would save far more money. We've seen, as I mentioned in my opening statement, 300 to 500% price hikes during a shortage. So that's one way we would save money. But also, we're paying a lot more every time the medicine's not there and the people have to be in the hospital longer, or you have to have a substandard medicine, or the hospitals have to pay extra staff to take care of people. And so over the long run, you save much more money than you would otherwise because you stop these shortages and you guarantee safer, more effective medicine.
Thank you. You know, Americans shouldn't have to worry about the quality of their prescriptions, whether they're safe to be able to take, whether they're effective, what will happen if the supply chain breaks. And for me, that's reason enough to manufacture right here in the United States and using federal contracts to lower those production costs. But I think there are a lot more benefits for doing this. That is why I have a bill, the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Defense and Enhancement Act, that would do just that. And I hope we can get some bipartisan support and get that moving. So thank you very much. And again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today.
Thanks. The Senator Warren had we served on committee together, a subcommittee on armed services. And we had she had a hearing, and the individual from DOD tried to explain that he couldn't buy American because there's regulation that required him to buy foreign, and then we found out that there was no regulation.
Yeah.
So
I think he has a regulation to buy the cheapest.
Yeah.
So there's always a cheap thing, and that's the problem that we talked about.
he couldn't explain.
He probably didn't know.
Yeah.
We have analyzed those costs for specific molecules among our industrial base, and we've verified that they can be produced by U.S. manufacturers an equivalent price. What's preventing that is certainty that they will have a long-term agreement to supply it so that they can make the investment. And then secondly, we submitted data for the Congressional Budget Office based on this bill that showed one mustn't think of it as a one temporal point in time where an adversarial country or a foreign manufacturer is purposely to drive out all U.S. manufacturers, put the price way below the cost. If you look at it on a 5-year average, as Andrew said, you would save significant dollars because once they drive every U.S. manufacturer out, they increase the price, massive volatility. So it has to be looked at from a budgeting office on a 5-year average basis. And that's not even to bring in what Andrew said. It costs over tens of millions of dollars per shortage of drug within a healthcare system. So they're incurring significant costs of those shortages as well.
You know, and I was just going to say, I get really frustrated on this, that people treat risk as if it's free. We are paying a price for risk, for the fact that, yeah, we got it right down to the tightest nickel on how to purchase this stuff, but it's a very fragile system.
You just pay for it another way.
And that's a cost.
Can we go back to what the Senator Warren was bringing up? So if we took the DOD and we took the VA, right? We just took those two, and I'll just take their drug buying. Would that be enough volume to move volume to?
You would transform the U.S. generic supply chain, and you would also cause a force function for private markets to then also now procure from U.S. manufacturers because of the reasons we just said. You don't want a quarter of your pharmaceuticals in an FDA violation site. You want to have certainty in local response time, resiliency. You would fundamentally transform our generic supply chain.
So what percent of the drugs of the generic, let's just do generic, what percent of the generic drugs if the DOD and VA did just their generics, what percent of the volume that come into the country would that be?
You just
is that of 100% of generics sold? What percentage is DOD of that 100% and VA together buy?
Oh, I don't have specifically those numbers, but from a standpoint of moving the market and creating an industrial base, 200 to 300 medicines into generic would cause a significant resiliency base and a U.S. manufacturing base.
Right. And then, Mr. Sardella, you've worked with companies that have opened up plants.
Expanded.
All right. So have they been able to make the price almost equivalent to what's being bought from overseas?
Correct, with new technology. So we're not just saying make it the same way. We're through the private investment in public from state of Missouri and Asper. They're making it in modernized methods. I give the example, it's like they currently make them in batches the size of this room. Now they make them in equipment that's the size of this table.
So do you have what the return on investment is? Do you know if you were going to invest, how much would it take to open up a plant, and what would be the how long it would take to get your money back? Do you have any idea yet?
On some of the drugs, because we're focused on expansion, because there's 30 billion doses of idle capacity in the United States. 30 billion just sitting there. So we're focused on taking those idle facilities that are already FDA approved. What it means is they can get the drug commercialized in less than 5 years, and they get a return on investment in 3 years.
3 years. Okay, so we actually don't have to invest money. If I'm a business guy, if you gave me a 3-year return, I'll do that every day, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, okay, so number one, we can get the cost down. And number two, we can get the investor gets a return.
Correct. The return's so strong that our partners are going and getting their own loans to be able to expand facilities.
So what we got to do is go back to what Senator Warren said. We got to commit volume.
Correct.
So if just DOD and VA did it, and that's it. Okay.
It'd be transformational.
Okay.
Can I just add? It's in maybe 10% of total volume.
Okay.
I mean, it absolutely would bring domestic manufacturing to the U.S. It would help secure supplies for VA, but it's too small of a fraction to really create change in the rest of the market. So it's not to do it. I absolutely encourage you to do it. This is a perfect thing very sensible thing to do, but we need to think beyond that, because we need to sort of change the dynamics in the rest of the markets, in the 90 or so percent in the markets, to change how those markets operate and what they value, and just
I ran a hospital company, and I was 2% of the entire healthcare dollar, and because I focused on I could move all the volume in the whole country. I could force everybody to change based on buying, based on quality. Everybody had to change because I was because nobody would. I was the biggest committed buyer, and the VA. So I think what you said makes sense. But reality is most people are not committed buyers. That's why. If we have real committed buyers, then I think it'd have a bigger impact.
And I'm sorry that Senator Warren left, because Senate Finance actually has a proposal on that was put forward last year that exactly does this. The idea for the most vulnerable supply chains, which are a lot of the generic sterile injectables, is to create committed contracts and then have add-on payments for choosing reliable manufacturers. So absolutely the same concept, and we really it would be great to see movement on that side.
So have any of you done business with the DOD or VA?
Yes, we've done business with the DOD and the VA.
And did they care about quality?
No. So, I was going to bring that up. I commented earlier about technically acceptable, and I think that's a misdefined term in this circumstance. They're not considering resilience, for example. They're not considering the benefit supply chain, and they're viewing that drug overseas as equivalent to the drug domestically made. And I think that's the big mistake. I would say that what we could use would be a DOD set-aside requirement for American-made, for example. I completely agree that the VA could lead the charge. I think you'll find that private hospitals or the commercial hospital business that you're familiar with would actually follow that lead. I think they're ready to recognize the need for resiliency and stability in the supply chain, but you need that big buyer to step up and start the process. And I think that's the VA and the DOD.
And I can confirm what Tony is saying, because we are aggregating demand with healthcare systems and retail pharmacies, knowing that this is a national priority for our nation. So they are willing, as he said, and that would give a further indication to aggregate demand across their systems to procure US-based supply for the benefit of the system.
So for each of you, if you had a choice, there's two different, same drug, and you had one little bottle that said made in the United States, okay, and the other bottle said made in China, how many of you would buy, same price, they both look really nice, same pretty little bottle, how many of you would buy China?
I might want to disclose that my original background is as a toxicologist in this context. I would absolutely buy the U.S. medicine.
Anybody buy China?
No.
Nope. What if it added on there that whether American or Chinese, that it's under an FDA violation, however small, and so there's some website that you can go to see what it was. Would that have an impact on you?
Yeah, clearly we would avoid buying anything that had an FDA violation. You know, when you think about something so sensitive as a drug, right? We're not buying a toy or a vitamin. We're buying something that affects our health in a very personal way. Absolutely, we'd buy quality.
So think about it. The buyers in this country: federal government, hospitals, nursing homes, GPOs, doctors, pharmaceutical chains, right? Have you known any of them that's required they did it based on quality?
No, I regularly do business with all those entities, and they don't really require. They may want to, but there isn't a method for them to assess that quality. As we've been describing, there's really no independent way to measure or
Good.
report.
But Tony, they could say, I'm not doing it if you haven't had an FDA inspection within 3 years. I could do it if you haven't had, they could do it.
They could do it for sure.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So I have studied generic sterile injectable shortages really for 15 years. And transparency often comes up that we don't know, which manufacturer is reliable. But at the end of the day, it's the lack of incentives and the fact that hospitals and GPOs do not fully internalize the harm that comes with it. So the numbers that Andrew commented on.
Can you go through, when you say the harm, how do you define that harm?
Yeah. So the amount of money that hospitals, there was a study, $360 million from additional costs resulting from shortages, right? So it seems like a large number. This comes out
because of cost.
Because right, they have to have additional staff and whatnot. That comes out to $60,000 per year. That's nothing per hospital. That's that $60,000 is nothing for a hospital. But if you look at how much
for a day, by the way,
and this is for a year, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the level of the cost, hospitals are very strongly incentivized to buy the cheapest, and in a sense, it makes sense. These drugs are therapeutically equivalent, right?
We're not paying for quality.
We are not paying for quality. We're not paying for quality. And I will say that I have to disagree with Andrew here. I don't think there's free lunch. If we want to have reliability, if we want to have resilience, if we have to want to have quality, we will have to pay for it. And I think it's we have to ask ourselves, how much are we willing to pay for it? But there are ways to do it. But you have to change incentives. I think, Civica RX, I don't know if you're familiar with that organization, right? They do a lot of homework around where the drugs are made. They have stockpiles. So in a sense, they have long-term contracts. Hospitals are not signing up for these contracts. They're really wary about this because, oh my goodness, they might actually end up paying more. Right? So we have to change the fundamental incentives and shift sort of how hospitals are thinking about it.
Well, the problem, I used to be in the business, I used to say, nobody came to my hospital because I served Pepsi over Coke, right? So nobody came because I did this, I had this drug or that drug, or I bought my drugs in the United States, or I bought my drugs someplace else. I mean, I got
That's
out
right.
of business 30 years ago.
There isn't accountability for hospitals either. If they have a shortage, they point at the manufacturer, right? So it sort of it ultimately ends up with the patient, unfortunately.
So Andrew, have you, when you say that it pays for it, have you been able to do a study of what the additional costs, the additional hospitalization, blah, 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 any of those things? Have you done that?
Yes, we're currently working on a study to get an exact number here, but from all the research that we've done so far, looking at the productivity costs, the shortage costs, and as well as just the worst patient outcomes, whether it's delayed care, rationed care, or getting substandard treatment, the costs vastly outweigh. And so we're currently in the process of making a study to get an exact number on this, but it is clear already that the long-term cost is much, much more savings than it would be by paying the marginally more rates in the beginning. And then on top of that, I'll add for this buyer side for the hospital, because we don't have this mandatory country of origin labeling, the hospitals themselves often don't know what the supply chain risks
Even
are.
if they wanted to do the right thing.
Exactly, especially when it comes back to the API. And so because they have so little visibility into the quality side, they have to go for the price. And that inevitably pushes things more offshore.
And I can tell you that where it really does pay off is for the patient. So there was one study that looked at one particular shortage of a drug, and the fact that more patients ended up dying of septic shock because the alternative was not available. And when you looked at the cost of life and you calculated the number of patients that died, that single shortage cost over $13 billion.
Right, but the hospital doesn't pay that cost.
And the hospital does not pay that cost. There's a big gap between the.
It's worse.
That's
you
right.
Get
you pay the hospital.
The worst is that if we don't pay for results like we should, we should pay different. Like if somebody doesn't do fix your car right, you don't pay.
Mm-hmm.
But every healthcare provider thinks, well, you still have to pay. Why?
Right. So the problem is you're talking about dynamic scoring, which is not how hospitals balance their budgets. So when you do your analysis, you say it's only costing them $60,000 a year because they're not obligated to factor in all the cost and harm caused to the patient or to society or to any other stakeholder outside of their bottom line. So that's the problem. Like the costs are spread to us. The profits are given to the provider. And so when they're doing their cost-based analysis, they're saying, well, we're going to go with the cheaper drug. The DOD is the same. So every purchaser in the system today has multiple factors, but cost is almost always the factor. And I believe
it's the decision today.
Yeah.
Savings today, not the long-term cost.
Correct. No one does dynamic scoring. No one actually wants to bear the full brunt of the cost. So I think part of this committee's job is to really do all the pieces that you've all suggested, country of origin labeling, making sure we know the quality up front, have a incentive, as you say, to do the quality testing, make sure that the cost, as you've decided, Andrew, is documented to the world, to the patient, to the United States. And then to the other piece of national security, that's not even calculable. You can't calculate what will happen if we're at war, the risk. If we're at war with China and you can't get antibiotics into this country and how many millions of people die, that's the cost of that is trillions of dollars. It's incomprehensible. And so the truth is this is a reason why no one's done this work before, because the cost is incalculable. So I'm really excited about the work this committee's doing, and I think it's important.
So it seems like if you go through the process to make movement, the easiest thing is, because they report to us, is DOD and VA, right? If they started buying based on buying American, that would move the needle. Right, that would move it the fastest. The other is, why doesn't we talk about these violations, the FDA or the FDA knowing that we only have one supplier? Why aren't they doing something
In regards to diversifying?
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, if they're responsible for us staying safe, right?
Well, their mandate is to ensure that manufacturers comply with CGMP manufacturing practices, and that before they even produce those medicines, that they've been vetted through analysis of them. So going beyond is to managing the supply chain itself and saying how many, that would be outside their bounds in regards to what they would work on. Yeah, and I would also say that. Sorry, Marta, just one line. I'd also say that strategy also does something very different as well. It's a strategy of redirecting as opposed to countering, right? As opposed to countering and trying to counter India and counter China, which will be very resourceful, right? Being able to start with redirecting manufacture through procurement, US-based requirements, US-based prioritization, which, by the way, we're the only nation that does not prioritize their domestic manufacturing source over foreign. So the ability to do that is a far more higher probability of success because you're redirecting, you're not countering, which is difficult.
Did you want to say something? Okay, so we can, just off the top of our head, we can think about the VA, DOD. We should have some sort of map, even if we start, like you said, you can't start big. You should, even if we start small. And then we should have higher expectations for all of our buyers.
And demand transparency.
I definitely
We can
think
require transparency.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I got it.
We should require transparency. We should require labeling. We should require information. And then that also can move a market, because you can shame people into not, like, if they're not caring where their drugs are coming from and they're not caring about the outcome to their patients, you can shame them into better participation. And then if the DoD and the VA can be the standard bearer or the hallmark of success and show that long-term their costs aren't going skyrocketing high, they can then make the case you should do these long-term investments, get the quality drugs you need, and then pushing governors and pushing presidents to invest domestically. Because the other point you all raised up is that most of our adversaries and most of our competitors, they do domestic investment. Every company in China is wholly owned by China. They will do all the baseline investments. So we can create an investment fund that actually invests in domestic production to incentivize it. And even if we don't want to create a pot of money, we certainly can create massive tax incentives. So there's many ways to create carrots.
Well, and if Tony said it's right, there's a 3-year payback. You don't have to invest a dime.
Especially if you're using existing facilities, and that's the key.
And we have, at least short term, we have plenty of capacity.
We have over 30 billion doses of idle capacity.
And also you can use the Defense Production Act to require us to use that capacity. So once we map capacity, if you've already done that, we can publish that to say we will then ask the DoD and the VA and the president to ask each of these manufacturers to use all their capacity to begin to ramp up domestic production of the top 10 required generic drugs for our safety and survival.
And you have facilities that are highly experienced at producing these medicines. So they should be leveraged first and foremost because they're experts in these areas, like the companies that Tony brought up, before even starting up new facilities. We will ideally, hopefully, we'll be able to open new facilities, but leveraging the incredible experience we already have in this industrial manufacturing base that is elite, and being able to provide them new technologies, that's where the investment, I believe, is the greatest place. Because it's about investing and allowing for sustainable independence by these manufacturers. We don't want the government to continue to have to invest in them. Modernize their facility, leverage their expertise, let them invest themselves now that there's a market, and allow them to be sustainable long-term economically to produce these medicines. And you've created the demand. So demand, investment in modernization so they can compete. So long term, we don't have to revisit this and have to continue to fund it. The industries themselves can do it.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman.
Can I comment on transparency? Because I think it's really, really critical. So the way I think about transparency is who needs what information and what are they going to do with it? And I think it's really, really critical to ask that question, because some transparency for the sake of transparency is not going to get you anywhere. And transparency can actually sometimes backfire. And so I am a very big proponent about the government having transparency. This is how you decide what to prioritize, where to invest. This is why it's important for FDA to know that manufacturers might have a problem and this buys them time. But for example, hospitals really want an early warning system of shortages. But you know what that means? That means that they basically have a sign to stockpile really early, and then FDA actually has much less time to try to fix the problem. So it's not always that way. Where I get really nervous is transparency to consumers. And I'll tell you why. And I actually have a story very similar to Peter Baker's story. And it actually involves my mother, if I would be allowed to share this story. So, and I've never shared it publicly. My mother was diagnosed with cancer in early 2020. And she needed to get radiation and chemotherapy. And it was going to be oral chemotherapy. And it was a 60-day supply of a pill. And it was going to be an old generic. And knowing what I know, I got very nervous. And I basically thought, if my mom doesn't respond well to this therapy, I will never forgive myself, because what if that product was not made to specification? So I actually have access to a lot of information, and I looked at who the manufacturer is for this NDC, and I looked, where it might be manufactured and what are the alternatives. And, you would think that I would be knowing, and it was really difficult for me, and I have access to really top information. And you would think that I would be the first person to say we need to fix it. But you know what I learned from this experience is the complete opposite because of what happened next. I went to one pharmacy and I said, can you dispense me this NDC? They said, no, we don't do special orders. I went to another pharmacy, I got the same answer. Pharmacies are reimbursed in exactly the same way. It's a low business margin. And you have one option when you go to a pharmacy. Unless we were to fix how pharmacies are reimbursed and how pharmacies stock, the patient only has one choice: to pick it up or not pick it up. This is not like going to a store where you have 5 shirts and you get to choose one. They don't have a choice. So by giving this information to consumers, where there's absolutely no incentive for a pharmacy to do anything about it and respond it, that is a recipe for a lot of non-adherence. And so, yes, I would prefer to choose the non-Chinese drug over a Chinese drug, but at a pharmacy, I'm not going to have that option. So it's really, really, really important that we either fix that problem or look for solutions elsewhere.
Let me give you a response. I really believe in transparency. And I'll give you a story. So if you, so I've run a bunch of companies, and you know what every employee wants? They want every hospital in the network. That means you get no discounts, right? And so the reality is, if I had 2 plans, and everybody's included in a plan that's cheaper with just one hospital, include a smaller network, some people would pick one because they know it, but some people would pick a bit more expensive. I actually really believe that that people they'll look at it and look, is it going to be perfect? No, people buy ugly sweaters sometimes. But I believe over time it will force whoever the pharmacy is. If I walked in and I had one and it said, I'd start bugging them. And we see it now. We see it with people buying America. You can even get on Amazon, which still doesn't disclose all country of origin, but you go to Amazon now and they have sections. And I can tell you, I've talked to people that make it in America. They put the label on "Made in America," their revenues go up. So I believe I agree with you. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be perfect. It's not, the information never is perfect. But if we do it all, it will force people to change. They will change. I've seen it in too many businesses. So, do you want to add anything?
No.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for being here today and participating. Look forward to continuing to work with members across the aisle and down the dais. If any senator has additional questions for the witnesses or statements to be added, the hearing record will be open until next Wednesday at 5 p.m. I want to thank each of you for being here. And if you have any suggestions for either one of us going forward, we are going to get this fixed. Thank you.